Snow had a way of turning Winterfell's courtyards into a field of small silences. It dulled the clack of the practice yard and the mutters from the kitchens, pressed the breath of men and dogs and horses into soft plumes that rose and vanished like thoughts. Sansa watched the flurries slanting from the pale sky and listened to their hush. Below, the yard stirred with ordinary winter business. Arms mended, hoofs picked, stores counted, ordinary. When nothing in the world felt ordinary any longer. "Lady Sansa," said a guard at her back, gentle with the title. She turned. The man stood uncertain, half snow-speckled, as if he feared to bring news to the Lady of Winterfell. "What is it?" "Your brother has come, my lady, the younger one, the boy with the chair." For a heartbeat, she saw Bran as he had been. A boy who climbed where he shouldn't, whose laughter used to ring along these ramparts. Then she saw him as he had been returned to her, cold-eyed and grave, a stranger wearing Bran's face. She followed the guard down the stairs and across the yard. Dogs whined. A horse stamped. Someone called for more peat for the fires. Mira Reed stood by the gate, stiff with the long road. Beside her sat Bran Stark in his strange wheeled chair, penned by the shambling bulk of Hodder's absence as much as by wooden spokes. "Bran," Sansa said, and felt how the name did not fit him. She bent, gathered him. He did not flinch, but nor did he lean into her, winter carved into a boy's height. "Hello, Sansa," he said. Mira's hands were raw with cold. Sansa saw in the cradled places between her fingers the hollows of losses she did not yet dare count. "Thank you," Sansa said softly. "We owe you much." Mira only nodded once. A warrior's acknowledgement. There were things only he could do. Bran's eyes shifted past Sansa to the weirwood that loomed over the godswood. Snow caught in its bone-white branches and clung as if it had always belonged there. "I need to see the tree," Bran said. It was late for the godswood, and yet Sansa sent servants ahead with torches to bank high flames in iron baskets around the heart tree. The great face carved in the weirwood watched them approach, tears of sap frozen into crimson tracks. Bran's breath smoked. His wheelchair's wheels hissed on the path beneath it. Mira waited beyond the circle of firelight. Sansa knelt by her brother, but Bran did not look at her. His gaze bathed the face of the tree. A wind shivered through the wood and Sansa felt something, forbidding as winter water, stir within it. "I remember a bed of blood," Bran said to the tree. "A tower with no windows, high and hard and hot. The blue winter roses. The men outside who died because they were loyal." Sansa's breath stopped. She knew that tale, knew it as the thing that had made her father a rebel long before she was born. Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. Kidnapping. A war. A coronation interrupted by the weight of a man's skull collapsing under a warhammer. Bran turned his head at last. "Jon is not your brother," he told her, with no malice and less pity. "He is your cousin. He is Lyanna's son." Rhaegar est son. The winter pressed in. The torches guttered and flared. The weirwood would not blink. Sansa had thought herself a woman who could not be surprised by grief. She felt the ground tilt beneath her feet anyway, though she would never have allowed herself to fall in front of him. Somewhere, deep below the practice yard and the kitchens and the rooms where she had once hidden from monsters, the kings of winter lay in their crypts. Sansa imagined their stone lids heaving as if history were rolling in its sleep. "Rhaegar," she said. Even the name was a kind of betrayal in a Stark mouth. "The tale is wrong," Bran said. "It was not a kidnapping. They wed. He loved her. She loved him. She died. She asked our father to keep the boy safe." Bran's face flickered with something like baffled tenderness. She would have named him for the swords, for the songs. Father named him Snow. The years she had shared with Jon. Just because he was kind, because he laughingly called himself a bastard and meant it, rose in her like a tide. She saw him standing in the yard wearing Lord Bolton's bruises. She saw him crowned in the snow, the North yelling king in the North as if the voice had never been theirs. She saw him turning away and away again from any throne that tried to stick to his hands like pitch. "If this is true," she said very slowly, "the realm will not believe it. They will tear him apart with it. They must hear, Bran said, before the Dragon Queen comes, before the winter breaks upon them like a hammer and flattens all their chairs and titles into the snow. Sansa folded her hands to keep from shaking. Why before she comes? Because the truth's shape changes when a dragon lands. Because men will call it ambition when it is only blood. Because we will need something stronger than pride to stitch this realm together when the cold comes. She looked toward the tower where Jon had slept the night before riding to White Harbor. He was gone now, riding with Davos to settle provisioning, to raise men, to beat swords out of plowshares one more time. She thought of him hearing this from her, and she felt how the truth might be both a gift and a punishment. "How do you know there was a marriage?" she asked. "Because I have walked to the morning when it was done," Bran said. "But they will not believe that with no ink and no witness who breathes. There is a book, a dull book full of names no one cares about. It sits on a shelf in Old Town where men grow fat counting their knowledge. It will say that Rhaegar's first marriage was set aside and that a different one was made with my aunt. It will be there. The man who writes down what men eat and how they wed and where they die wrote this too. It is real."
Sam, Sansa breathed.
She clutched the name as if it were a rope thrown to her.
Sa.
Well, Tarly is in the Citadel. He will know how to find it. Bran's eyes had turned back to the weirwood's bleeding face. Yes. Sansa stood, the snow whispering around her boots. "We send ravens." Bran did not look away from the tree. "I will send more than ravens." Before Sansa could ask what that meant, Bran's eyes furrowed dark. His breath shallowed, and the skin of the world thinned. The fire hissed. Somewhere a dog barked, and the bark stretched oddly, as if pulled along a wire. Sansa backed away and left him there, a boy thrown against the trunk of a story so large it took the shape of a god. She went to the Maester's tower and summoned quills. She wrote to Jon, hands steady through the dread. "Come back at once." She wrote to Samwell Tarly. "There is a record. Rhaegar. Consent. A marriage in Dorne. Look to a private registry, the sort a vain man keeps." She wrote to Lord Manderley and Lord Glover and Lord Serwyn. "There will be talk that eats through the north like moth through wool. Hold your ground until we sit and speak." In Old Town, the rain came down soft as dust, easier on the throat than the harbor's salt wind. Samwell Tarly had not slept much in the last week. His bones felt full of ink and the angry ghosts of books he had not yet read. Between chamber pots and remedies, between Master Ibro's patience and Pylus's nervous apologies, came the pages. He stole minutes from sleep to comb through them. He had started with the unnatural, dragonglass, White Walkers, the ancient wars of the children, but these days he felt as though his eyes were slipping over words at angles. He missed Jon with the ache of a pulled tooth his tongue could not stop probing. Gilly slept with the child in the corner, her one-eyed look at peace. When the raven wrapped the leaded pane with its small dark thought of urgency, Sam rose and opened with fingers that shook. The bird fluffed, annoyed at the wet. He took the ribbon and cut it. He read Sansa's hand and sank onto the stool, the letter easing none of his weariness. "A registry," he told the sleeping room, which did not object. "Something private. Something Maynard would keep. He keeps everything." Maynard was fond of listing. Sam had come to think of the Septon as a catalog with lips. Tolls collected, fines levied, marriages contracted. Rhaegar's obsession with prophecy and with songs had brought him to Dorne more times than sense would advise. If he had asked for an annulment, it would have started with a quill and ended in ink. Sam stood and took up the candle. He moved to the shelf that held the dull, the dutiful, the things men believed would matter to someone long after they were bones. He scanned the spines and found the tidy, fussy hand of Septon Maynard with a certain irritated pleasure. He pulled the ledger, heavy as a promise, and he thumbed through it while Gilly stirred, eyes opening. "You'll catch fire with that candle if you don't watch it," she said sleepily. "And then all your precious books will scream." Sam smiled crooked and gave her the letter. "Read," he said. Gilly's mouth turned. She sounded out Sansa Stark in her rough, careful fashion. "I know this. The one who gave you the meat pie and looked at you like you weren't nobody. That's her. Gilly read, and then she turned her face to him, astonished. John? She says John. Sam looked back down at the ledger and went cold. Here, he said. Here. The entry was no more than a line. Being a man who loved words, Sam expected truth to take more place. It did not. The line was tidy, the hand prim, the language that of a septon who had never loved anyone. On this day, the marriage of Rhaegar of House Targaryen and Elia of House Martell, Princess of Dorne, was set aside by annulling decree. On this day was solemnized before the seven and men and witnesses the marriage of Rhaegar of House Targaryen and Lyanna of House Stark. Witnessed 3 sworn men of the Prince's Guard and Septon Maynard, by his own hand. Gilly whispered again, John. The ink was all fresh with Sam's breath. He touched the page carefully as if paper might bruise. Gods, he said, and then, because he could find neither wit nor comfort, he said it again. Gods. He closed the book and seated himself again to write the letter that would change the shape of a man's life. He did not write as a maester. He wrote as Sam, with all the awkward tenderness that had become his spine. He wrote what he had found, and he wrote what it meant in the old law of bastardy and of birth. He ended with a piece of information that made his fingers prickle to set it down. Old accounts of Obsidian's properties had led him to a volume that mentioned the greatest known deposits of dragonglass lay under the smoking mountain on the island called Dragonstone. He underlined it because sometimes you must say the thing twice to make men believe it mattered. Ravens flew from Old Town to the north and from the north to every corner that would listen. But Bran did as he said he would, and the ravens did more than carry slips. They gathered and swirled. They came like a storm, scores and then hundreds, from pine and tower and rock, sweeping down upon the maester towers of Barrowton and Deepwood Motte, upon the rookery of the Eyrie and the stunted stone of White Harbor. Men woke to windows black with birds. The ravens beat at shutters, called with voices like cracked bells, pecked at letters with their beaks until strong fingers opened twine and wax. The message was always the same. In Sansa's Winterstraight hand, in Jon's few round letters pushed onto a second sheet when the first ran short, in Maester Wolkin's neat script. Lord Eddard Stark, of honored memory, took a child from the Tower of Joy at the end of the late rebellion. Not his by seed, but his to protect, sworn to his sister Lyanna at the moment of her death. Rhaegar Targaryen wed Lyanna Stark in Dorne before the fall of King's Landing. There is record of it in Old Town, found and tested. By blood and by law the boy, called Jon Snow, has the name Targaryen and was the rightful heir of his father. He has kept the north and fought for it, and he will fight for it still. He claims nothing of the south, but the truth will not be less for our not speaking it. Winter is here. We ask you to hold with us in the face of it. The dead move. The living must as well. In the great keep of Winterfell, Sansa called a hall and the lords came wrapped in furs and caution. Torches smoked yellow-orange. Men stamped snow from their boots. Salt and fat hung in the smoky air. Littlefinger stood at Sansa's shoulder with velvet in his voice. My lady will steer this well, he murmured, and his eyes took her measure anew. Lyanna Mormont sat stiff as a spear, unawed by anything. Lord Glover frowned as though the parchment had insulted his father's father. Wyman Manderly's bulk strained a chair and his small clever eyes moved from face to face, weighing. Jon Royce of the Vale wore bronze and old contempt. He believed this dragon talk apparel to every mountain his house had ever named. When all were seated and the noise ebbed like a tide, Sansa stood. You have had the letters, she said, her voice thrown clear into the beams. Our maester has seen the Old Town record. Samwell Tarly, sworn brother of the Night's Watch, has signed his letter with that hand and with the seal of the Citadel. I have spoken with my brother Bran, who sees things others cannot. This is truth. A hiss ran through the hall. No snake, but something like it. Truth, said Lord Serwyn dryly. A convenient truth for those who would see a Targaryen on a throne again. We in the north have bled for the south's thrones enough, Lord Glover said. Lyanna Mormont's voice cut across them. He was king in the north because we named him. We did not look at his name then, and we will not blink now that we know it. If Jon Snow, Jon Targaryen, if that's his name, kept us from kneeling to a flayed man or a false lord, why should we let letters unmake him? How does one hold with a man who has no claim to be one of us? Royce demanded. The Dragon Lords burn men and call it justice. The Dragon Lords are dead, Manderly said mildly. We speak of one man raised under the eyes of Eddard Stark. Peter's mouth curved. He leaned in, voice for Sansa's ear alone. You see how they lay the stones themselves, my lady? You need only nudge them to the wall you wish to build. Sansa kept her hands still against the edge of the table. She saw the path he wished her to take. Stand forward as a Stark while Jon's new name blew cold through the hall. Set herself upon a northern throne and let the realm gnash its teeth on some southern boy. She could do it. She could feel how it would fit, cool and sure. Only the boy was not some boy. He was the man who had pulled her from Ramsay Bolton's hands and drawing her back from the black water of it. He was the man who had turned from power whenever he could, and that too was a rare sort of courage. The South can fight over chairs, Sansa said. Winterfell was not built to be a chair. She turned her face to the hall. We have one enemy who does not care who his grandfather was. He will empty your halls and fill your crypts with a murder of silence. If all you bring against that is old stories, you serve only him. The men of the North shifted, remembering the cold. Littlefinger's eyes went half-lidded. The line of his mouth smoothed. He saw where she would land and began already to place other pieces. She continued, Jon Snow is the man who has stood the wall, who took back our home, who sent bread and gold to houses that once named him bastard. I do not care what the Citadel calls him. I call him the man he has always been. He will speak for himself when he returns from White Harbor. Until then, he remains what we made him. It was not unanimous. It did not need to be. Men like Royce bristled and made their discontent its own banner. Most nodded and grunted and held. Lyanna's small chin tipped up in approval. Manderly's eyes closed in thought as if savoring a dish not yet served. The storms outside the hall threw dry snow against the shutters in steady hisses. Cersei Lannister heard the rumor under the carved lions of the Red Keep, and for a moment she thought she would choke laughing. Qyburn brought it to her on a cushion of grave propriety. He set down her goblet and watched her eyes. Jaime did not watch her. He watched the window where the cold sun tried and failed to warm the high panes. A bastard found to be a dragon. How neat, Cersei said, swirling her wine and looking into it as if the future might be reflected there. A tale for the small folk. The North never could tell the difference between a bedtime story and a claim. It's more than a tale, Qyburn said, humble as ever. There are letters with the Citadel stamp, names of septons, attestation. He knew how to dole out poison so it tasted like humility. Cersei lifted an eyebrow. Arianne Martell may as well bake a pie and put a crown in it for the boy, if parchment is to be our meat. She put the goblet down and the ruby wine sloshed. What matters is what men are made to do. Send the little birds to White Harbor and to Winterfell. Bring me everything. If he has Targaryen blood, he will burn. Burning is what they do. Jaime's mouth twitched. Something like a wince. Something like a memory. It's what your king did, she could have said, but she did not. She had learned the art of letting his own mind do her cutting. And send to Euron Greyjoy. Tell him there is a fish fat enough to make even his appetite swim. He may want to throw his net where the salmon and trout meet the sea. In the shaded palace in Meereen, the tiles cool even in heat. Tyrion Lannister read a copy of the letter and went very quiet. He read it twice and then a third time. Varys watched him from under his patience. Interesting, was a... Tyrion finally allowed his lips. Daenerys Targaryen took the paper and held it as if it might bite. She had learned to brace for letters. Letters had toppled cities in front of her, had set her name on men's tongues in forms that were not hers. She read the words slowly, her mouth a hard line. When she finished, she folded the parchment very carefully as though, being careful, she could make the edges meet on the world as well. Jon Snow, she said. I have heard that name already. He took a castle from a flayed man and gave his enemy a clean death when he needn't have. He was elected by men who do not like doing what they're told. And now you tell me he is named for my house. You expected the last Targaryen to be you? Varys said, gentle as a cat. We all did. The world persists in its habit of not asking our leave. Daenerys glanced at Tyrion. You met him. Briefly, on my way to the wall, Tyrion said. He was a boy with a bastard's laugh and an honest look. Hard to dislike, harder to rouse. He will have grown. He tilted his head. What do you want to do with him? She set the parchment on the table that looked out on the bay and the masts. Nothing that involves killing him, she said, and it might have surprised her own mouth to say so. If he is what that letter claims, he stands in front of the wheel that ground my brothers and father into feed for dogs. But he did not put himself there. Sending fire at him because of the shape of his blood would make me like those whose shapes I meant to break. She stood. We sail for Westeros. You have said so. But we will not sail at the first wind and burn everything between us and Dragonstone. I will sit where my family once sat. He will come to me, or I will go to him, and then we will see what the truth is. Your Grace, Yara Greyjoy said from the edge of the council. Euron will sniff any wind you put to sea. Expect him where your tail is softest. Then we will make it iron, Daenerys said, and you will teach me your knots. In White Harbor, Lord Wyman Manderly set the parchment down and dabbed his mouth, though there was nothing upon it. He listened to Davos speak. Davos with his hands like raw wood and his mouth honest by habit as much as conviction. The fat lord's eyes softened around their lids. Winter had made him rougher, but not soft. He was a man who had rehearsed patience the way hunters rehearse silence. A dragon in a northern man's skin, Manderly said. The gods have a taste for jests. Very well. We will send our ships north with grain. We will send them south with swords. And we will put a belly under whichever bird needs it most. Dragonstone, Davos said, and felt the oddity of saying it in this white hall where oars creaked like tree limbs. There's dragonglass enough there to arm every man from here to the bloody gate. If we do not take it, someone else will. An empty island? Manderly asked, skeptical. Empty, Davos said. Stannis left it stripped. The Lannisters did not think to crown a rock. He did not say the rest, that if a Targaryen queen or king came to claim it, they would be better met by northern hands already swinging picks. My king thinks we must seize it fast. Your king? Manderly echoed with that little glint of humor. Which one is that, Ser Davos? Jon Snow of Winterfell or Aegon of the Songs? Jon, Davos said simply. He wants the first if it will help him feed his people. He wants the second like a man wants a toothache. Manderly laughed, fat and pleased. There's much to like about men who don't want their crowns. Very well, you'll have ships, not half the fleet, mind. The rest must stand between my warehouses and the Ares' appetites. From Eastwatch by the sea, Tormund Giantsbane sent a raven that stank of salt and cold fear. The letter's lines were jagged with wind. The ink froze and made white tears on black where it didn't want to spread. The wildling hand said, They come. Not 2, not 10, not 100. They come like the night coming. The ice cracks where there should be water. The dead do not care about water. We are building what we can and lighting what we can and pissing fire if it would help. Send men. Send stone. Send whatever the South has besides soft words. Jon returned to Winterfell under a sky like white iron and found the hall waiting as if for judgment. Sansa met him on the steps. Davos slipped away with the easy tact of a man who has learned to leave families their private hanging fields. Jon saw the tightness in Sansa's mouth and felt his own stomach knot in answer. I have something to tell you, she said. I know, Jon said. He held up Sam's letter, its seal broken in a hurry on the road. I read it at the last inn. I had to read it twice. They stood a moment as if they were standing on ice and could hear the cracks. Sansa's eyes searched his face for signs of shattered or of light. Jon's face gave away too much always. Now it gave away baffled sorrow and a glint of something else. Relief? No, not relief, not exactly. something like the lifting of a weight he had carried without saying its name. "Does it change you?" Sansa asked, and her voice was small for once, a girl's voice inside a woman's mouth. "It changes what other men will call me," Jon said. "It doesn't change the man I am when I wake and put my feet on the cold stone. It doesn't change what waits in the woods north of the wall. That's the only thing I can make myself care about." "I told them that," Sansa said. "I told them they could call you Targaryen in their wine cups and it would not change the winter." He smiled, quick and crooked and grateful as in the old days when they stole bread from the kitchens together. "Thank you," he said. And there was so much else in it, so much forgiveness and apology and kin. "We take Dragonstone," Jon said. "We mine it all we can. If the South wants to call me Dragon, then let me use the stone to save them from the cold." "You'll not leave me again without saying so," Sansa said with a touch of command she had earned. "I won't," Jon said. "I need you here." He would have said more, how he could not hold the North without her, how he could not think of the South at all. But the news from Eastwatch lay there heavy on the table, and that too claimed him. They left 3 days later, Davos at Jon's right and a half-score of White Harbor ships hissing through gray water. The winds were foul and the iron smell of weather came down hard. They slid past crags where gulls screamed, past fishing villages that had been there when the world was younger and would be there when whatever they were doing now had sunk into a footnote. The men were quiet, boots damp with spray, faces bent under the wet. Jon stood at the prow sometimes and stared into the weather as if he meant to earn his sight back from it by steady staring. "Your face is a map men like me can follow," Davos said low one night when they took turns sleeping near the braziers. "Try to draw less despair on it. The lads will think they're sailing to the world's end." "It may be," Jon said. He would not waste breath on a joke. Dragonstone rose from the sea like a thing that had lifted its head to breathe. The smoking mountain sat like a fist on a wrist of land. The castle's spikes and jaws looked sharpened even in the mist. They put into a stony cove and climbed the carved steps that had made men pant for centuries. The wind smelled like old fire. The gates were, as Davos had predicted, unguarded. The great hall stood as men had left it. The maps lay under dust. The great carved table in the war room showed a world that still believed in dragons. Jon put his hand on it without meaning to and felt a hum in the wood like a memory of hoofbeats. "Not our seat," he said, "more to the table than to any man. But our need." They began the work that would become their lungs. Men mined the mountain carefully. Others scouted caves where obsidian glinted like buried night. When Jon ran his fingers along the smooth flake of it, he felt something move along his bones. A recognition, faint and troubling. In a cave where paintings of the children of the forest blinked from the walls in ochres and whites, he stood long and quiet. The lines shaped men facing a storm of eyes, and he knew what the story meant without being told. "They fought together once," Davos said behind him, reading his silence as he had learned to do. "Children and men. And they won, alive as we are now, not songs or dust." Jon nodded once. He tucked a shard of dragonglass into his belt as if it were a talisman and turned back into work. Across the narrow sea, where the water can turn black under a sudden storm with the tricks of a cat, Euron Greyjoy laughed into the wind like a man who knows his own jokes are best. He found Yara's ships because he knew what he would do if he were her. The confidence of predators is a kind of sight. The battle was bright and ugly, fires licking at ropes and men's hair. The sand snakes fought like knives thrown in a crowded room. Euron fought like a man dancing with his hunger. He took Yara by her throat and grinned at Theon, who had forgotten how to be an Ironborn in more ways than one. When it ended, Euron sailed toward King's Landing with prizes chained like new songs at his belt. Daenerys did not weep for Euron's tricks. She swore and she thought and she changed the orders to her captains. She could not save the ships already broken. She could save the purpose behind them. Her fleet tacked hard for Dragonstone with the wind high enough to tear silk. It was a strange kind of arrival. The Queen of Dragons stepping onto stone where stark and manderly banners snapped resentfully in her face. Tyrion, who had made friends with the guards by the simple expedient of not poking them with power, walked up the steps at her side with something like mild amusement. "Welcome to Dragonstone," he said to her with a half bow. "We had meant to have a better feast than salted fish and men's grudges. But one takes the world one finds." She did not answer him. She walked into the hall like a woman who knew how to assess the size of rooms and men. Jon stood by the war table in plain mail and plain black. He looked like a man drawn with charcoal. Stark, smudged, earnest. When the Dragon Queen entered the hall, men looked at her as they do at a thing that might be a miracle or a fire. They called names. Daenerys named herself. Her long litany that had once been hung on her with hope and was now knotted to her bones. Jon gave his two names and felt one of them hang oddly in the air. "Your Grace," he said. And because he had been taught courtesy to every sort of person by a man who had been burned for his courtesy, he bowed. "You're welcome in this place." "It is my place," she said, not unkindly. "It was one of your families," Jon said softly. "It belongs to those who can use it to keep the living breathing. I have no wish to sit in your castle when there is work to be done." Tyrion's mouth quirked. He had told her to expect him to be this dreadful and this useful. Daenerys looked at Jon and saw not just a rival or a pawn. She saw a man with eyes that had looked at a sort of death she had not yet faced. "You have something that belongs to me," she said. "The knowledge beneath this rock and the means to shape it. Will you kneel and ask for it?" "No," Jon said. "I cannot kneel in truth to two things. I have already one winter to kneel to." He lifted his chin. "But I can bend my purposes to yours. The dragonglass is yours by right. Let me mine it and shape it and put it in men's hands. Let me fill your stores with what will save the people you mean to rule." "You mean to say you do not contest my claim?" she said crisply. "You, who may stand before me in a line older than many rivers." "I contest nothing that distracts," Jon said. "The world can argue after it has breath again." Elo okayed at her openly, and the hall felt the nakedness of it. "If a claim matters once the cold is done, we can argue then. If you want me to make you a promise now, I will promise to harm no one for a chair while the dead walk. I will promise to call you queen in work if not in words. I will promise to meet you at any table you choose to talk of the lives between us. But I won't kneel, not because I spit on your name, because I can't get up fast enough from the floor when the thing beyond the wall pushes." The dragons, hers, moved on the cliffs outside, their weight making the old stone consider its own seams. In the hall, something like wind moved through men's minds. She had not meant to be charmed. She had meant to be obeyed. But this unassuming refusal, which could have been insolence in a prettier mouth, was only gravity. "If I let you take what you want from under my feet, you will use it for what you swear," she said. "Those who give you iron will expect iron back." "I will give them life," Jon said. "How do I know the dead are what you say?" There was no challenge in it, only the pragmatic woman's unwillingness to be a fool. Jon could have said that every breath he took was proof. He only said, "Send to Eastwatch. Send to Castle Black. Ask the men who stand in that wind." Tyrion glanced at Varys, who inclined his head nearly invisible. Orders went on silent feet from that hall. Daenerys nodded once. "Mine," she said, with the smallest of smiles that was not quite admission of lost ground. "You may mine what is mine." "If I can ask another thing that is yours," Jon said, and then stopped. He had meant a dragon. He had meant a living fire. He bit the words back and put in their place a thing he did not expect to get. "Your presence at a council. A short one, with those who would like to see either your head or mine turn up in their wine cups. If we are to keep a truce with those who would break it out of habit, they must see our faces in the same light." "Whose?" Her curiosity sharpened. A whetstone's sound. Olenna Tyrell if she breathes still. Any snake left in Dorne who holds a flag. "Men in the Riverlands tired of Lannisters and Freys," Jon said, and the hall remembered the cry at the twins and the quiet work done in a kitchen there. "Even your brother's enemies may listen to a man who was their enemy's enemy's friend." It was comedy without laughter. "Cersei will burn anything she can. She cannot burn the dead. She will have to find another tool. She will find it, Daenerys said. She is clever enough in the dark. Very well. Send ravens on my paper and yours. Invite enemies and make them drink my wine. I have walked in stranger houses and left in better company. They worked then, because work is what saves people from the hole that opens under their feet when they say words large enough to make their names tremble. Smiths learned the trick of obsidian. They broke it like glass and bound it into spearheads and knife blades. Men learned to wrap it so it would not shatter in their own hands. Tyrion stood by the weir of labor and marveled that he was helping plan a war against weather and stories. Varys ran letters out like a gambler flicking cards. In the evenings, when the wind lay and the dragons slept, Jon stood at the cliff and watched the sea as if it might tell him news. Once, Rhaegal swung low and his wings pulsed a sound that made Jon's bones sing. The dragon's green eye skated over him, settled, and there was a minute of stillness in which Jon was very afraid. Because what is recognition but another name for judgment? The dragon snorted, bored, and lifted. Jon's fear softened to something even more dangerous. Wonder. In Winterfell, Sansa and Arya walked the yard together and did not speak of knives at throats, because such things, once spoken, have a habit of returning. Littlefinger moved as he always had, building thin bridges to other thin bridges. He tried to put Arya's wildness at Sansa's throat. He tried to put Sansa's new iron at Arya's heart. He did not understand that they had both met worse men and lived. Bran sat under the weirwood and nodded as if he were listening to someone who whispered only to him. Sansa called Peter Baelish to the hall one morning when the air was very clear and cruel. Men gathered with the small greed of any pack. They smelled blood at a distance. Littlefinger came in puzzled and quickly smiling. He had claimed puzzlement many times to excuse many omens. Sansa had rehearsed the words with Arya and Bran until they were iron. She did not hate Peter. She had spent too long in the rooms his sort built to waste hatred on him. She only noted that he had built a few too many to stand today. "You have tried to set me against my sister," Sansa said calmly, and Arya's mouth twitched the smile of someone who has sharpened a blade for the right throat. "You have told Lord Royce stories with holes in them large enough to fly a blue winter rose through, hoping he would fill the gaps with fear where loyalty belongs. You have told the truth when it suited you and sipped lies when it did not. You are clever." She looked a little sorry about it. "You are not clever enough." He started to say things he had said all his life, that he did everything for love, that he held no knife, that the world is not made safe for girls like them and a safe harbor is worth any cost. Sansa did not ask him like a child to stop. She asked Arya to do it, and Arya did, the small movement so light it was almost graceful. Later, Sansa sat by Bran and told herself she had killed a dangerous man. She felt nothing and scolded herself for feeling nothing. Bran looked at her and did not say a word. She began again to assemble stores and names and work that would keep other dangerous men out for a while. The council at Dragonstone was as mad as a story told by 4 madmen and a cook. Lady Olenna came because she had run out of other avenues of revenge and because she liked to look at young people who were brave enough to be fools. "A bastard prince," she said to Jon, for she refused to call him king or dragon. "A brand new queen, and some dwarfs and eunuchs to spice the stew." Her smile unfurled like a knife from a sleeve. "Well, I have eaten worse meals that did me more harm." Representatives from Dorne came wrapped in veils and rage. Men from the Riverlands, their faces lined like plowed fields, listened with that particular concentration shown by those who have buried sons and are not inclined to waste their grief. Davos spoke plain and asked for planks and pick handles as well as men. He always knew when a war hung on a thing as homely as a cartwheel pin. Tyrion infuriated and charmed and made quick agreements like knots. Varys dragged secrets slowly up from the bottom of his still waters. Jon did the thing he came for. He told of what he had seen and made men believe it. He did not gild the dead. He did not shout. He spoke of the way breath stops in the throat when an army of eyes looks at you and there are no eyes in their faces. He spoke of a cold that gets in under the nails and does not go. He spoke of a quiet so complete it might be music if you turned it sideways. When he was done, The hall breathed as though it had been underwater. Daenerys watched him tell their future as if he had the shape of it in his teeth. She felt the seat she stood on tilt under her, not with peril but with a choice. She had always thought she would have to ask men to kneel, because she wanted their kneeling to mean something. Now she thought the kneeling and the meaning had gone and married without her asking. She wanted very much for a moment not to be a queen, but to be a woman who could stand shoulder to shoulder with such men and throw fire at the right enemy. She did not say that aloud. She said, "We have one chance to get the Lannisters to do something they will not otherwise do. We will show them what we face. Bring them something they will not call lie." Jon's face tightened. He tasted the old hunt they had made in the snow. It had cost them a dragon there to buy a corpse for a queen. "We could capture one," he said, despising his mouth for being right. "We will not repeat mistakes," Tyrion said quickly. "We do not need to give the dead a prize again to buy a showpiece." He looked at Varys. "You have birds in old places. She has gray men in new. Let's find a body with a mind left in it behind a face that might say words." "Words will not move my sister," Jaime Lannister said the next day, when Tyrion came to meet him in the cold cellar beneath the dragon skulls, all rib and shadow. Jaime's hair had grayed at the temples and his eyes were as tired as any man's who has pulled a kingdom along by one rein. "She will say it is a trick and she will not care what happens to anyone but anyone she can't control. Then she will at least say it to our faces and we will have done the part that is ours," Tyrion said, weary as his brother, though less ashamed. Cersei met them not with a corpse but with wine. She listened to the talk of dead and of dragonglass and of a winter that would make her perfume useless. And she smiled the smile of a woman who would not be scared by anything that did not stand in front of her with a knife. "This is the story the North tells its children to make them come inside," she said. "The past has a way of insisting on wearing a crown. It will not fit on your pretty head," Olenna said. She clasped her cane and watched Cersei as if counting her steps to the grave. "You will do your trick and think you've done a statecraft. You will die anyway. The only difference will be if someone sings." Cersei regarded her as she might a fountain she had already ordered filled in with brick. "If the dead come, they will prefer your gardens to my stones," she said. "They will starve without noticing. We may yet be friends, mother." Jaime's jaw clenched. The meeting ended with no promise from Cersei. Tyrion came away feeling that he had failed in exactly the way he had expected. Varys merely nodded, as men do who have put their money on a thing that continues to be itself in all weather. The letter from Eastwatch grew more dire.
Bonfirus bent sideways.
Men manned the walls and the walls trembled as if they remembered something older and worse than any oath. Tormund sent little drawings along the margins with a dagger. "See how many." Daenerys stood on the cliff with Jon and watched the clouds turn bruise-dark where the sea bit the sky. "If they break the wall," she said, "it won't matter what flags we put on any tower." She put a hand up and touched her hair as if to test whether it was still as warm as it had been when she was born. "I will go. I will take the dragons. We will make the wind our ally." "You may lose one," Jon said, and hated his own mouth for being a man who had learned from pain. "I know," she said. "I will go anyway." They went. There is a palpable courage that crowds share when a dragon crosses them. Men who had never believed in anything but bread looked up and believed something all the way over. They went north in a rush of scaling the air, and Jon went overland with men hard enough to break on rock. The plan many of the clever men in the world would have called foolish worked until the world reminded them there is always a price. Daenerys rescued them from a flat where ice groaned like an exhausted beast. The dragon's fire drove the dead back and made steam that screamed. The Night King came into view not with fanfare but with that wrongness that makes your eyes not fit the sockets anymore. He took his spear in a hand that had forgotten flesh and he let it fly with that terrible smoothness of inevitability. It sang. It struck Viserion and turned the wild cry to a broken bell sound that Jon would hear under his sleep until he died. The dragon fell like an avalanche, noise and bulk and heat turned to a body. Men scramble. Daenerys screamed and did not know she screamed. She pulled Drogon and Rhaegal hard enough to tilt the wind. Jon beat back hands and the ice opened under him. Cold swallowed him, and he clawed up like a drowning man refuses the sea. When he staggered bleeding toward the ridge, men could not believe it. But he did, because sometimes it is necessary. The dead watched them with no malice, which somehow made it uglier. The Night King's men pulled at Viserion's carcass with the implacable cheerlessness of workmen hauling a wrecked cart from a ditch. When the blue opened in the dead dragon's eye, something hard fell down inside Daenerys and did not move. The wall fell not with a crack but with a long sigh, as if an old man had at last put down a tool he had held up for 1,000 years. Eastwatch shook itself apart. Tormund leapt for rope and for hands, and some were there for him, and he lived because men whose names no one wrote down dragged him up and cursed him back into life. An ice dragon climbed into the sky like fever. The dead walked through where there had been a barrier. Letters flew and were ripped open with you could hear 1,000 miles away if you knew how to listen. Sansa read and did not weep. She set men on the road and emptied cellars as if she were playing a game whose pieces she had once watched men play with her house as a stake. Bran's eyes went white and the ravens scattered across the land with the urgency of maps thrown onto a table. Arya took men down into the old tunnels and brought them up again, knowing where their feet would carry them when the north swallowed their tracks. Jon lay in a bed at Dragonstone while Melisandre arrived one morning out of a gray sea like a curse men had forgotten they cast. Davos swallowed his old tongue words like stones and left the room. The Red Woman put a hand to Jon's chest over old blood and closed her eyes. "Again," she said to the world with a tired sort of satisfaction. "Again." "Not for you," Jon said when he could sit. And he told her to leave again as he'd told her once, because his bones remembered what her choices had cost. She bowed and left and smiled as a cat does that has been fed anyway. Daenerys stood at his bedside with her hair unbound for once and her face unbeautiful with grief. "He was mine," she said without meaning to, meaning one dragon and not the man. Jon reached for her hand without thinking the way he might reach for a hound he had fed every day of a harsh winter, a simple fellow creature in pain. She let him take it because she wanted to know if that would change anything. It did not. After the fall, things quickened. Cersei promised a truce and then broke it with the graceful clarity of a woman who does not fear the consequences of her clarity. She told Jaime that she would not send any men north. She would instead bring the bank to heel and buy other men's swords while the dead and the living bid each other. Jaime stood in her chamber where he had held her and put a hand out and saw that his hand was empty. He took his horse and went north, not like a hero would go, no trumpets, but like a man who had at last stopped lying to himself. Snow caught in his golden hair and made a mockery of time. The north knit itself less out of love than out of habit. Sometimes habit is the only thing that will do. Manderly's ships ferried men down the coast to the Blackwater and back up the Mander with cargoes that would not last a winter, grain and iron and people. Lord Glover sent fewer men than he could have and sent apology with more flourish than dignity. Lyanna Mormont sent words sharp enough to cut rope and men with axes who laughed like murder. The Karstark heir and the Umber boy stood beside Sansa in the yard and learned to put down old family shame and take up spears made of glass. Arya moved through men like a rumor the way a rumor moves through a hall and leaves it uneasy and armed. Jon and Daenerys stood together above the painted table and moved stones that represented lives. They fought twice before noon on most days and apologized after with the small conversational grace of people who knew they would have to eat in the same room again. She called him stubborn and he called her hungry, and they both wore the names with an odd comfort. One night Regal landed on the parapet below their chamber and stayed there. His great head tilted as if considering the question of whether he would fly again. Jon went down, slowly, and stood by the dragon. He put his hand out and then took it back, because he had learned not to assume the gods meant him any particular favor. Regal breathed out and the breath smelled like knucklebone and sea. Jon laughed suddenly, a small private crack of laughter that sounded like a thaw, and the dragon blinked once slowly, as if in satisfaction. When they moved north with their dragons and their glass, the dead were already moving like weather. The long lake smoked with wrongness. The weeping water froze in ways men said it could not. Daenerys learned to aim dragonfire at the dead who clustered at bottlenecks. She learned not to waste breath on the ones who moved in the open, because fire kills. It does not hurt. Jon learned to set lines and bait pockets and then break them, all with men who would not live to finish their jokes. The war with the dead produced no victories that felt like victories. It produced days that ended with most of your men breathing and the road in front of you not cut off. It produced mornings with frost that glittered too brightly because you had woken at all. News of Jon's blood and name grew stale to the realm. What did it matter if a man's name ended with Targaryen if he stood in the snow and gave you a knife that would kill the thing coming for your daughter? The bards kept up. They wrote ballads thicker in the south because ballads breed in warm places. In the steadings of the neck, men didn't sing, but they learned to pronounce obsidian. The crown sat empty in men's minds except as an abstraction they entertained at night when the wind did not sound like teeth. Cersei did not drown. She was too well built for drowning. She scythed her way through the months, cutting a new army out of the air with gold she had not truly earned. Euron took men by the throat. He never pretended to love them, and they followed him because his honesty suited theirs. King's Landing did not feel the winter the same way. It felt hunger first, then fear when word came of cities that did not answer letters. The small folk looked up at the Red Keep and felt that the world was not for them anyway. They shrank into themselves and did what small folk have always done: endure and make soup. Jaime reached Winterfell with hands that remembered making fires in the rain. He gave his sword to Sansa because she was the one at the hall's center, and she took it with narrowed eyes and a softened heart. Brienne of Tarth arrived back from a scouting run in time to see him, and her face suffered through 3 expressions in 1 minute. She forgave him because in the end no one else could do it with the right mixture of accuracy and hope. Podrick stood red-cheeked and sure. The men ate their harsh bread and their stewed onions and did not complain beyond the ritual words allotted to complaining. When the dead came upon Winterfell, it did not feel like war at first. It felt like the weather had turned inside out. The night had a pressure to it as if it were full of hands. Sansa stood on the battlements and thought of every time she had stood in this place and felt she had no control of her life at all. Now she felt not control exactly, but something else: the right to stand and not run. Arya sharpened her staff and smiled a wolf smile that made men shift a little away from her and then back again. Bran sat by the heart tree in a wheel of men with spears and arrows around him like the spokes of his chair, as if the world itself had come to stand around him and listen. The battle turned and turned again. Ghost sank his teeth into a thing that had once been a lord. The dragons raked fire and turned part of the plain before Winterfell into black glass that hissed and stank and shone like men's eyes. Men died in ways that will never make a song. Not because they were not brave, but because the songs already have enough dead. The Night King came on his dead dragon, and the air around him learned to hurt. Jon had thought himself beyond being surprised by cold. He was wrong. He fought toward Bran with the stubborn single-mindedness that had once made him jump down from a gallows and run again with his sword toward men who had murdered him. He did not get there. He did not need to in the end. Arya ran as if she had been created to do just that, and the knife went where it wanted to go, and the Night King broke like a kind of brittle. The dead fell, and the silence after was not like any silence Jon had ever known. It had gratitude in it. They burned the bodies, and the pyres made Winterfell smell like cooked meat and old iron. Sansa stood by the flames and thought of names, because names were all she had to give many of the men who had died. Daenerys stood apart thinking of Viserion's blue eye closing. Jon stood with Davos and did not speak for a long time. The war against the dead ended the way the summer ends, not with a day men can point to, but with a long exhale. Then the realm looked up, as if blinking out of sleep, and remembered the living and their chairs. And because humans will be humans even after they have seen the end of the world, they began to talk once more of kings and rights and the old words that shrank in winter and now swelled to fill rooms again. Cersei drew her last hand and lost, not in the dramatic fashion she had perhaps thought she deserved, but by inches and across more tables than she could see. Jaime stood on the wall of King's Landing and looked north. He knew that if she asked him in the right way, he might yet do something foolish. She did not ask him. She had at last come to prefer other weapons. She toppled. She broke. She did it in a way that made some of her enemies feel cheated of a better spectacle. That should have pleased her. The city did not burn the way it might have with other rulers. It simmered. Men put out fires while still arguing what to call the water. In the long after, Daenerys sat in a cold hall at Dragonstone, its wind whistles like a ship with no crew, and looked at a crown on her table and another crown beside it that wasn't truly a crown at all, just a shard of obsidian someone had polished until it reflected back anyone's face. Jon stood at the door, and his boots left a hissing wet mark where snow melted. "We could make a council," she said without turning, as she had done before. "We could make a thing where a woman like me with dragons would never be allowed again because it would be unnecessary. We could make a thing men could not ruin by being born." She let herself smile faintly. "It would not work. They would find a way to ruin it. But we could make it anyway and then make it again when it breaks. They would not feel cheated if they were asked to speak," Jon said. "However stupid what they say." She turned then. "What do you want, Jon Snow?" He had been asked that question all his life by people who had not listened to any answer. He considered the shape of the thing honestly, because that was what he did best even when it hurt him. "I want the graves to stay undisturbed," he said. "I want the children to not have to know what snow tastes like when it is full of ash. I want to not sit on any chair larger than a stool and yet be of use. There are in fact stools in every tavern in the realm," she said dry. "You could be king of those." "They'd throw me out for not drinking enough," he said, and they both surprised themselves by laughing. "The realm will ask it," she said after a breath. "It knows a name now. It will ask you to come and sit and be a kind of idea." "Names have their uses," Jon said. "They also have their ways of slipping the leash." "Do you want to marry me?" she asked suddenly, because she had for days been circling something that would not let her sleep. "Not because of the wheel. Because—" He looked at her like a man in a snow field who sees a fire and distrusts it as much as he wants it. "You are my blood," he said, and the sadness of it carved lines beside his mouth. "We did not know it. We know it now. That is enough to put a hand up. I would not dishonor myself that way." She nodded. She had expected it, and expectation did not dull the bite. "Good," she said. "Then no one will say you sat because you wanted what my bed gave you. And perhaps they will be less awful to me because I did not ask a man to be warm for my sake." She stood. "We will make a council. You will be my hand in matters of the north, or whatever we choose to call it. It will anger some men because everything angers some men. Let them take their anger to the kitchen and chop wood. If they do it long enough, they will call the thing they made with it theirs. In the spring, such as spring could be after that winter, the green was not generous but it existed. Lords came to a place under the trident where the stones could be moved aside and a pavilion raised. Mammoth things were talked about that day, and some of them even came to pass. The words Great Council were said as if they had been meant to mean something this whole time. Sansa wore no crown and the braids in her hair were simple. She spoke with an authority that made men check their teeth for their own tongues. Arya came near long enough to be polite and then went somewhere no one else wanted to go because she could not abide seeing men play with knives that were only words. Bran sat by the edge and looked amused, though he might have been listening to a bird that had nested there 100 years ago. The outcome pleased no one entirely. That is how you know something lasting has been made. The realm did not name a king familiar to the old order. It named an order that would ask for kings when it wanted them and for councils when it did not. The North remained itself, and Sansa sent back careful replies to letters that called her queen without saying the word herself. The South argued some more because that is what the South knows how to do. Daenerys sat a throne less because she wished to, and more because no one else could stand the noise of the room she had emptied of certain kinds of roaring. Jon returned home and supervised plantings and punishments and signed letters with his name and his other name held within him like a second heart he would rather not think about. He answered when people called him Lord. He answered when some, usually young and prone to romance, called him something else. He let both roll off him like snow off a pitched roof. Once, in the heat of a summer that did not quite believe itself, Jon rode south as far as the neck and stood at a place where the wind smelled like peat. He looked back at the trail behind him and saw how it wound like something stitched by a drunk tailor. He thought how his life had tried to make itself into a simple thing and how it had failed for reasons that had nothing to do with failure. He remembered his father, No, his uncle, with his plain face and kind mouth, and how that man had kept a secret because he was asked to buy a dying girl. He remembered a beautiful prince in a tale and felt no awe. He felt something else. Gratitude to be alive because so many were not. Bran sat by the heart tree and watched a raven blink at him. He had been hearing the world longer than anyone knew. He knew that men are small and also that they are sometimes very large. He did not think he was a god. He thought he was a boy in a chair and a tree that knew him. When Sansa brought him a blanket because the wind had risen, he took it and said thank you, and she smiled because he did. Arya came once and put her hand on his shoulder, light, and he knew she was thanking him for something he had done that she would never think of as saving her because she did not conceive of herself as needing saving. He thought perhaps that was the best sort of person to save. Daenerys flew less often in those years, not because she loved the sky less, but because she loved other things, too. A city that did not burn. A table where quarrels could be laid like knives and counted. A girl who had grown up in a tavern and could make bread that bent men's memories of hunger. The dragons grew more thoughtful. Drogon slept in places that made men's poems strange. Rhaegal lay on a rock that looked like an old woman's elbow and watched the sea as if he were listening to an old lover. Sometimes when Jon was on the cliffs with Ghost at his side and the wind in his hair, Rhaegal would drop from the high air and put down his great head beside him, as if to say nothing important at all. There were betrayals in the years after. There were famines and small bad kings and quiet good ones. There were children who bent in the field to tie up vines and did not know the names of half the men their grandparents had cried for. There were bards who got the story wrong in ways that made it sound better to ears that needed it. There were nights when Jon woke and had to walk the battlements because the thought of ice in his lungs would not let him sleep. There were mornings when Daenerys laughed with Sansa over something as small as a spilled bowl, and the world felt large enough to contain both the laughter and the dead and the gods who looked down and did not speak. Bran had been right, Sansa thought sometimes, to say the truth changed when a dragon landed. It had become armor for some, dagger for others. It had forced men to bend in places they had long refused to bend. It had made those who loved Jon love him at a different pitch. It had frightened some of the wrong people and fortified others. It had not broken the world. That was something. She stood once more on the ramparts in a snow that fell slowly, small as breath. The fields were not lush. They might never be again as they had been in the myths of those who loved bread more than truth. But they were fields, not graves. She pulled her cloak around her throat and smiled at the men below quarreling over how much salt to put in the sausage. She had learned in the end that this was what rule was. Quarrels over salt on a morning when men were not dead. Jon found her there, as he did sometimes in moments that felt almost like the past. He stood with his head slightly bent, as if the weight on his shoulders were a thing he must keep balanced at all times. There's a fellow from the Fingers who says his lord took 3 sheep and a daughter and wants justice, he said. Justice is 2 sheep and his lord's nose broken in front of him, Sansa said without missing a beat. Jon smiled. He put a hand on the cold stone and felt it grit his palm. Bran sends odd messages when the wind is wrong, he said after a moment. Do you understand them? I understand that he tries, Sansa said, and that sometimes he succeeds. Perhaps that is all we can ask. The snow made small sounds against the stone. The world carried on. Somewhere far away, in a place where the sea had never learned to be anything but restless, a dragon sneezed and made a fisherman drop his net. In Old Town, Samwell Tarly set a quiet hand on a book and taught a boy who used ink as a weapon to believe that truth is something that can be found if you are stubborn enough. In King's Landing, a young woman whose mother had died in a kitchen stirring a stew read aloud to her own daughter a ballad that got half the names wrong and all the hearts right. Bran had sent the truth into the realm too early or just in time. It depended on which song you favored. It had made a snowstorm in summer and a shadow in fire. It had turned one man's simple life inside out, and then, because life goes on, it had turned it right side in again. Jon walked the walls and was tired at night and loved his people in the ways that matter, which are small and so enormous nothing else compares. Daenerys sat in a chair when she had to and stood the rest of the time because you do not sit long when there is work. Sansa learned to forgive herself for not being able to save everyone and to enjoy the taste of an apple in a way that made sense only to those who had eaten turnips all winter. Arya went to a place with a door that would not open for anyone else but would always open for her. The dead stayed in their appointed places, long enough that children forgot to be afraid of the wrong things and learned again to be afraid of water too high and ice too thin and men too cruel. On a certain evening when the wind was gentle and the sky a clear blue that made it look like kindness, Jon stood in the God's Wood with Bran. The heart tree bled its slow red. Ghost lay with his muzzle on Jon's boot and snored a very slight snore that would have embarrassed him had he been a man. "They sang of him," Bran said, as if to the tree. "They still do." "Who?" Jon asked, though he knew. "The boy our father, our uncle, carried from a bed of blood," Bran said. "The snow who was a song. The song who was a man who chose to be a man and not a song. They like songs because they never have to pay them for their work." Jon snorted, sharp and short. "I have always preferred work." "I know," Bran said. "That's why the world is still here." Jon leaned back and looked up. The sky did not care. That too was a comfort. He folded his arms and thought about the difference a name makes and what rests in a name's shadow. He did not think he had done anything all that grand. He had simply been alive in the right direction for long enough. He would continue to be. He closed his eyes and let the gods would whisper and did not try to wring a vision from it. He had enough of visions and of men who insisted theirs mattered more than bread. Sansa had chosen the cooks as carefully as any captain. The evening meal was onion and mutton and brown bread and ale. The hall filled with steam and talk. Knives flashed and bread broke. Men sang because men always will when they feel their bellies go less hollow. The song that caught in the rafters had Jon's name in it and Daenerys's and all the wrong adjectives. Sansa laughed into her cup and did not correct anything. Tyrion drank carefully and stage managed a joke. Davos told a story about clams and lied about the size. Brienne smiled at something Podrick said and put her hand on a hilt out of long habit. Gilly banged a spoon because the boys at the end of the table were drinking too fast. Sam blushed because he still could. Varys watched the room with quiet contentment and no scheme at all for a long minute, which might have been his finest work. Snow moved against the window and made the small whisper of its endless attention to the earth. Ghost twitched in his sleep and dreamed of deer he would never catch and did not mind. A dragon on a southern cliff shifted one great wing and shook off a dream in which he had fallen. The winter had not left the bones of the world entirely. It would always be there, a thin ice on the pond under the willows. Men had learned how to walk it. There were letters that would be written in the morning. There were taxes to be counted. There were petty lordlings with old grudges that would need to be resolved with newer patience. There were wolves to be fed and stables to be mucked and a gate to be mended again. There were bards to be paid and sailors to be hanged for someone else's crime and someone to be absolved when the truth crawled up out of a ditch and made itself known. There were 1,000 small mercies that hold a realm together more tightly than any crown that ever hurt the head it sat upon. Somewhere a girl picked rose. In a courtyard the war had missed and held them to her nose, disappointed because they smelled like nothing at all. She would learn that some beauty is only for the eyes and some for the hands and some for the mouth and that sometimes a thing is good enough. Bran opened his eyes under the heart tree, seeing again the present. He had learned not to live always in the stream, immobilized by the past's current or pulled under by the future's cataract. He lived here more often now because here was where his family stood, because here was where winter bees still found places to hive, because here was where one boy he remembered and 2 men he had met had made a story instead of a prophecy, and it had held together with the rough grace of a net that catches more fish than it lets through. Before Daenerys had come, he had sent a truth into the world, and it had lit certain corners and darkened others. It had made gentle men brave and brave men careful. It had not called down a heaven or raised hell. Only men raised those, and they had chosen not to. He looked up. The ravens came anyway, out of habit or out of love for the work of flying. They perched and watched and remembered some part of a boy who became something else under a tree. Bran nodded to them as if to old friends, and they cocked their heads back. One hopped down and took a piece of bread a soldier had left as offering, though the gods had never asked such things. The raven swallowed it and made a satisfied sound that had nothing of the sacred to it at all. The god's wood was full of breath. The hall was full of noise. The road to the south was a thin scar. The sea kept doing what seas do, which is to meet and meet and meet the shore and make it change its mind. The world turned. Men made what they could of it. Jon and Daenerys, Sansa and Arya and Bran, these names, this handful of stubborn bones, had chosen to be people and not statues to set in niches. That choice, repeated enough times, makes a kind of history. It is always too early or too late to send the truth into the world. Bran chose too early, which was to say just in time. The rest of them, mostly by accident and sometimes by stubborn will, chose what to make of it. And that was enough.